Hello guys and welcome to the fun lesson, I think, to the rendering and look depth and lighting lesson. Cool, so we will start with the smoke shape and after that we will shade the organic shape here. So I think our resolution is pretty good to be rendered, so that's now 600,000 polygons. I think that's pretty okay. Cool, so we got our geosmoke. But of course we will also need maybe a background and some lights, so we will do that now. I will place down another kind of geo. I will call this geo BG for background or back. You can also maybe backdrop. Let's color it in green. So fully up to you, background, backdrop. I think they're both really common words in photography or in professional photography, background and backdrop. So we'll start with the simple backdrop here. We'll need a grid for that. And with the grid I want to make it slightly curved and of course place it like here behind our geometry. Cool. So we will do that. I will just drag the rows and just let it drop on the columns, and we'll choose relative channel reference, so we can. The channel reference is now will reference the rows, and we will dial a little, maybe 35 of resolution. And of course I will use a bend, or you can make, oh, not a guide process, a bend. Of course you can make a noisy background with noise and get some kind of cool organic shape too out of that. But that's again fully up to you. I will use the grid snap and go on set capture region, like that. And I will just bend it a little bit and twist it a little bit. For example, 30 degrees. That was too much. Cool. So this is basically our background. So I will place a transform here so we can transform our background, for example, to an initial position, but I will then of course transform it in the object level. I will use a preset here, Centroid preset. Maybe you don't got this, so we will do it manually. We'll just pipe in Centroid, open brackets, close brackets, and 0,0, and then we will copy that, paste it in here, 0,1, and on the last one 0,2. This will basically move our pivot in the bounding box center on our geometry, so we can handle that a little bit easier. So now let's place that here. So this will be our front, maybe like that, so we can place it. That should be totally fine. And again, a null for organization purposes, out BG, background, and a material, of course. We'll need a background material. And I will call this RS matte. Dive up, and we got our background. Woohoo! I will place a null, so with the null we can later just quickly move our background and manipulate it a little bit in maybe scale or rotation, so we can quickly adjust it to maybe other angles or another camera view. So we did that, we did our background, we did our geosmoke, but what we need to do is also place a material in here. So material rs mat underscore smoke, and dive up one level. Now of course we need to set up our lighting and our render, our initial render setup. So first of all, the materials, place down a material network, just type nm and it will immediately pop up, and in the matnet or at the matnet we will rename this to rsmat, or I usually do that. You can name it whatever you want, maybe materials or material network, redshift materials, and so on. Then we will need a ROP network, so basically a render operator, and I will call this rs out. So that's that, and we will dive inside, and I will place down a redshift custom. So just type in R and get the first one, or if you don't want to do that, you can just click on the redshift shelf tool on Redshift and it will all set up automatically. I will go to Redshift on global illumination and choose the brute force, and on system I will use enable automatic sampling and enable optics RT on supported GPUs. Optics RT is basically RTX acceleration with ray tracing cores. So if you got an RTX card, use it, try to use it. So, and that will be out TS RS out 001. So I'll usually do that, and for commercial work I will copy it, for example, and make another one, for example low, and on the low one I can then for example use 1/3 of a resolution and render for sorry, and render for example a quick previous. Just a little tip here. Let's delete that again, and we've got our redshift setup. Now we need two materials, so rs material builder. Of course later we will need 3 for our organic form. So rs mat smoke meshed and rsbg background. Let's just make another one, rs mat organic smoke form, or let's call it maybe geo. Let's call it form. Yeah, let's call it form. Cool. So our background smoke meshed and our organic sculpture or form. So now we need to apply the material, so I will dive into the geo underscore background, and usually you can do it by just click here on the open floating operator chooser, and you can go in our rs mat and then of course use the sept, and it will apply the material to our given geometry, or you can press shift and W, and we will go to the to obj rs mat, and then you can just drag and drop the material in here, and it will not get a direct path, it will get a relative path, which is also not bad. So we created our background, or we applied our background material. Now we need to apply the same thing on our smoke. So again, shift W for example, and just drag and drop rs underscore mat underscore smoke underscore meshed on our material, and now we've got our material applied on the rs mat smoke. So we now applied both materials, but now we need a camera. Let's place a camera here, dive inside, press the lock button, so we will stay in the camera view. And now you can decide what you want to get in your frame. I will choose full HD for now, and a little wider length, maybe 35 millimeters. Classic focal length. Just to get a first simple rendering here. And of course we need lights. And I mentioned it in a previous lesson. We will do a manual light for that. So RS light. And I will call this first RS light top underscore 001. With this first light we will create like a top light, so we will move that up and we will get that down here. And yeah, there's a little, I think maybe it's a normal error, but that shouldn't be an error. Yeah, no problem. We got our top light here. Oh, let's just disable that one. We got our top light here, and I will choose a light. I will use the disk. So we got our yeah, basically like a softbox shape. And I will go on the top view, so press 2 on your keyboard, and I will just scale it a little bit in that direction. For example, like that. So you can go back to your usual viewport with 1, 2 is top, press 2 again for the bottom view, then 3 and again 3 for front and back, and 4 right and left, and 5 is your UV perspective. And I will dive in the camera and I will start a render for the first time. So let's start the render view here. Failed to get aces. Okay, it got aces. And we can already see it's way too bright. And we need to move our light a little bit up. So I will do that. Go back in our light. And we will move it a little bit up. So this light currently got a high spread, so it will also illuminate our background, which is good. We can make it more focused on our initial geometry by just maybe tilting it and get it a little bit closer to our object. And what you can do, for example, you can dial down the spread. And we can use a second light, what I like to usually to do, a second light for our backdrop, to illuminate our backdrop maybe in another kind of color, to get a different mood in the rendering. So currently you see a pretty hard reflection in our render. That's basically because we got the standard materials applied. So I will dive into the backdrop and I will make it white. And the roughness I will pipe that up to, for example, 0.5. And now you can already see we will not get this harsh reflection. Let's dial our light a little bit down. For example, -3. Now we will need, of course, a more of a better backdrop light. So I will move the backdrop a little bit. And I will make a RS light, and this is the backdrop light. And with this kind of light I will get a much larger spread. And for example, We can go from the side, so we'll get a little bit of a gradient. And this light will affect our backdrop. And now you can already see we will get here our backdrop light. Of course, we can, for example, go to 0, but then it's totally blown up. To make it softer, we'll basically go a little bit further away and increase the size of the light. Of course, that will also increase the light intensity. And for example, you can dial it down to -4. And now you can play, for example, with the color. But I will leave it at white. And now we can play, for example, in the color in here. So we can go for like a slight orange orange color. Or maybe a bluish color. That's of course fully up to you. I will now use a bluish color. And now you can see our geometry. Yeah, it's pretty shiny, of course, because it's the standard material, but the underside or the bottom side of the geometry is pretty underexposed, and we need to get some light in there as well. So I will just copy the top light. I will rename it as, let's call it rim_B for bottom. Or let's just call it B light. I usually use B for bottom light. And I will drag that in here. Like that, and maybe tilt it a little bit, and now we can restart our render to have a quick look. And now you can see we evenly lit out the model, but I will go -6 to here, so we get a little bit of a shadow, brightness, darkness difference. So we will enhance the contrast of the image. Another kind of thing I want to use, of course, a little bit depth of field. The focus distance, we need to dial that in here. That's way too much. COC radius maybe 0.1, and a bokeh image. There's also a YouTube tutorial out on my YouTube channel how to create like a simple bokeh image with your camera and your lens. Cool, so we got that. And now we can go, for example, for the meshed smoke material. So this is now our really basic lighting setup. And for example, you can make it more rough, the material. And what I want to do, I want to create a second camera to get a better close-up view, and I will increase, for example, the focal length. And I will search for a nice spot in here. Maybe that one up here, that looks good. Maybe try to get maybe that piece right here into our final framing. Cool, so we got that. I want to reduce the top light a little bit, so -4 on the exposure. That should be fine. So we will get a really cool, a really nice gradient from like a brighter blue to a darker blue. And of course you can make it neutral. For example, you can also make it like fully white. will look cool too, but of course fully up to you. Back to blue, and we'll start with the meshed material. I will start with, let's just first go back, and I will just place down a normal to get proper normals on there, and just restart the rendering. Cool. So, for example, what I want to do now, I want to create two kind of materials. The one like more diffuse, and the other one maybe a little bit more shiny or metallic, and blend them both together, for example with curvature. So we will use that. Another kind of thing what you can do, but I think I said that already earlier, you can render out, for example, the velum, the velocity lines. That is also pretty cool to render out. And we can do that too in the next part, when we will render out our little final organic form, and we can do that too with the lines, because they will look pretty cool, and you can achieve really nice style frames with that. And when you then combine, for example, the lines with another kind of aspect, so an aspect of, or reference it to something, so to maybe a commercial with flow, or yeah, I think the possibilities in there are pretty much endless. But I hope you will get the idea. So we will place down a curvature. Pipe it into the surface at first, and I will go for harsh curvatures, or 0.0, maybe 25, should be good. And you can try convex or concave, that's again fully up to you. Now we can use a ramp, for example, and we can remap our curvature a little bit. So if you go here and that one here, I want more black, yeah, a little bit more, nice. And 0.0, maybe 1, 0.1, yeah, that's way too. Yeah, now you can see it will also affect the polygons, so that's way too high. The individual polygons. So we got that, and we will need a material blender. And with the material blender we can basically blend two materials. So for example, we got now our first custom material and our second custom material, and we'll pipe that in here. And I will use a preset of aluminium, GGX, that's fine, and the color edge tint, that's also fine, but I want a little bit more roughness. So for example 0.45 and the roughness parameter. And now you can see we need to adjust, for example, the lighting based on the material, because it's now way too reflective, and we need to dial, for example, we can dial now down our top light. Let's do minus maybe 7 or minus 9, for example. But when we will, of course, we will layer materials on top of each other, and let's see how that will turn out at first, and then we can, for example, adjust our lighting. So that into blend color, and I will make that material like blue, or pretty hard, or an orange, like a complementary color of blue. You can just dial it in here, so go to complementary, and you now can only have the complementary color. I will use like a little bit of a desaturated orange and pipe that into base color. Of course that will look pretty good at first, in the first iteration, because it's basically the complementary color. And now we can dial in, for example, our layer color too, and we already set up our curvature, and now you can see we'll blend both materials based on the curvature. Let's have a look on camera 1. That will look cool. Whoops, our camera is a little bit out of place. Well, let's go back in here and get a focus back on the track. And now, for example, you can use it with curvature, or what I also really like to do is to use noise. So I will place down RS Maxo noise, pipe it into the surface, and now the fun will start. A cool thing is to use like a Luca noise and then pipe in the scale, like for example 0.1 and 0.1, and for example like let me just guess a good value. Maybe you can do it here, or you can do it like 0.1, so you will get these kinds of patterns that are really cool too. And it will, when we will just basically put that in our ramp, we can now determine like the contrast, or yeah, basically the ramping of our noise, and we'll pipe that back into the blend color, and now we will get these really cool kinds of blending effects. I will go back to that and use a little bit more of a realistic kind of pattern. And now we yeah, basically combined both of these materials together. And of course you can see it's maybe when you press Control, you can see the colors are a little bit off, so they're burning out, especially the whites. Let's look at the darkest area here. Okay, and we can adjust that so easily. Just dial down your light a little bit and it will look much more better. Of course, burned out areas are of course a kind of cinematography, kind of a rendering way, or a directional way to get a certain mood. For example, in photography too. But for now, I like it when it's a little bit more subtle. So we did that. That looks cool. Of course, what you can do, you can also try out one single material. So, for example, a subsurface material. Subsurface scattering 0.5, subsurface scattering radius maybe 0.1, so you can play with that, and it will look pretty cool too if you get a really like a really simple subsurface scattering. Of course there is the RS-SSS, so RS subsurface scatter. Oh, I didn't color that in here. Of course you can do that too and play with yeah, I think like the subsurface scatter material will work really good on our form, or on our organic form material, to get this like really a kind of maybe bacterial looking, or yeah, soft looking, soft feeling. But it looks pretty cool on here too. What is also a cool thing to do, let's just dial it back to 0 and 0. To get a glass material, just get a glass material. We'll need to refresh that to update it. Oh, I think my shortcuts are gone because of a new Redshift version. Let me just refresh. IPR I got usually on Q, and render I got on 0. No, 0. Will it refresh? Yes, it will refresh. So with a kind of glass material, I think you will get a really cool look too, especially if you're going for that macro look, or this really close-up look. And when you then dial in, for example, roughness, and of course we need to turn our light a little bit back, -9, minus 15. Yeah, that will look better, but you will basically get the idea. Back to -6, for example. And what you can do, you can get the noise that we set up here, copy that, and with the copying of that noise, we can now pipe that into the surface and have a look. Okay, that looks fine. We can again copy our ramp, reset the ramp here, pipe that again into here, and for example you can use a preset like the infrared, grayscale, white to red, two-tone. So two-tone is pretty cool, I think, so let's go with the two-tone here. And I will pipe that into the refraction transmittance and pipe that into the surface, and you will get really cool this colored in glass effects. Let's make it more subtle, so you can achieve really cool effects with with glass basically too. So that's that. Glass, blending materials, subsurface scattering. Oh, and another one. I want you to show this because I think it's important to know like different kind of material techniques or different aspects. Let's go to the full view, and just, for example, just use a simple copper, and voila, it already looks pretty good. So you can use that, for example. And of course, another kind of important step you can use is to make imperfections. For example, bump mapping. So I will dial it down to 0.5, and I will get a RS bump map in here and pipe that into our material, into bump input. And of course now it's basically roughness 500 because we need to dial down our bump mapping. So for example to 0.05, or that's way too high. Let's make let's make it really subtle, so 0.001, and I will dial up the roughness a little bit, and now you can see really cool this the detail here coming up through the basically through our bump map, or basically bump mapping. And it's also important to play with this kind of bump mapping or normal mapping to get more details. And of course you can use it, for example, on glass. So I think that was the glass, yes. And if you pipe that into here and get to the close-up and maybe change that to a kind of bluish color. Let's go back to the surface, and I will increase our noise pattern here. And you can increase it a little bit. And now you can see, let's just get the bottom lights to -10. -15. Yeah, and now you can, yeah, that's good. And now you can see, for example, the roughness will build up on the glass, so with the bump mapping, of course. You can, for example, delete or fully erase the roughness and get some pretty cool details with bump mapping on a kind of refractive material too. Yeah, here you can see it. Looks pretty good. Let's get one more bucket. Yeah, cool. So, just for a quick example. So glass, then try out metallic materials are pretty cool. Or you can try out what I usually do sometimes is just to try out, of course, the presets, and of course build like your own materials. But for example, the milky coffee is pretty cool too. So it's a really strongly subsurface material, or an extinction subsurface material, and you can, for example, try out different colors here to get really cool effects. Extinction scale, you can play with that, for example 20, or let's go to 30 and scatter scale on 50 or 150, and you can play with that too. Phase is also pretty cool to play with, so you can try that too. Just try to get some cool materials and lighting and shading. So this is the first lesson on shading the smoke object, and on the next chapter we will, let me get it up here, we will shade that little form. Okay, so I will see you in the next lesson with shading.